metrics that matter, doing business in the UK versus NZ, the recruitment battle and how to win it. Those are some of the things we discussed when we caught up with the guys from Virtuoso a couple of months back. Welcome to episode 5 of Insights as a Service. All right then. So Markus, McIver, CEO of Virtuoso, and Roman Paljk. I hope I've pronounced that properly.
You have.
All right. NZGM of Virtuoso. So look, guys, I think that there's a lot of really interesting elements to your story. As I understand it, you started off in the UK. You're moving into New Zealand. You've got a track record of working together, I think, at OneNet many moons ago. We'll sort of get to where you are now and what you're doing now in a little bit. But maybe, Markus, if I can sort of kick off with you, maybe just a bit about kind of how it all kicked off. I think, as I understand it, you and I want to say Greg, is it Greg McCallum, the CTO, who was one of the co-founders?
We actually all worked together with Roman actually at OneNet many moons ago. Greg actually went to the UK, I think he's a couple of years before me. And I went over 2010, just, like many young Kiwis going over to the UK to do your big OE. I went to the UK, I think, there weren't that many places that you could actually go and get a visa that easily. And back in those days, you could get a visa into the UK. All that sort of changed now, although it's sort of coming back around full circle again, which is pretty cool. But I went across.
What year are we talking here? What year did you go?
So 2010. And yeah, turned up there with a bunch of my mates and slept on some people's couches for a couple of months and did that whole thing. And yeah, I mean, the UK was just awesome. You kind of get there and I ended up getting a job pretty quickly, I think 3 or 4 weeks. And I managed to nail a job with, at the time, the biggest Citrix reseller in the UK, or I think they were the original Citrix reseller and they'd grown to be the biggest Citrix reseller. And yeah, I mean, just the scale of the companies and, the size of the platforms and the technology that we're dealing with coming from little old New Zealand was quite stark. But that really opened my eyes just to the scale of it.
Well, was that the big initial takeaway that, when you compare the technology and you saw the structures that you saw, the difference between the MSP space and NZ, the MSP space in the UK when you turned up, was it simply the scale or was it more that they were utilizing tech in different, maybe, more meaningful ways?
Well, I think in technology scale, when you're working, the bigger things get in a funny sort of way, kind of the more interesting that they get. If I think about the exposure that I'd had to technology in New Zealand, a lot of the bits were the same, but just when, we're talking about, so much bigger scale, it just kind of got more interesting. But yeah, I mean, with that scale came lots of complexity in terms of the technology, but also in terms of kind of the way that they operate. Over in the UK, everything's so sort of specialized. Everybody turned up and there's a storage guy and there's a network guy and there's an AD guy and there's a and that just wasn't quite the same. And I think that's why Kiwis do quite well over there, in technology and otherwise, just because you kind of because you work in smaller environments, you kind of become more you get a broader kind of view of how things work. And that enables you to be kind of a lot more sort of cross disciplined. So landed in 2010, ended up kind of reconnecting with Greg over a few beers, and one thing led to another, and eventually we decided, hey, I think we can do a pretty good job of this in the UK, and we decided to found Virtuoso, and we founded that in April of 2011.
So that to me is kind of insane. So you landed in 2010, a year or maybe a year and a half later, you kicked off your own business. Being in a country that you didn't have deep roots in, you didn't necessarily have any sort of old boys network or any kind of it wasn't like New Zealand where you probably knew most people in the industry or a lot of people in the industry, felt you could walk into somewhere and probably know someone who knew someone. You got to a point pretty quickly where you felt that you not only had a point of difference to market yourself on, but you could also find a way to get into the places you wanted to sell into. So what gave you that confidence? I guess 2 questions. 1, how did you have the guts to give that a go? And 2, how did you go to market? How did you get those initial wins?
Crazy, right? I mean, I think, and I think, in retrospect, you know, there's probably a little bit of naivety in there, but I think, we certainly, we grew a network pretty fast. I think in the UK, a lot of how business works is similar to New Zealand. It's meeting people, it's that networking. And over the course of, Greg had a lot of contacts. By then, he'd been there a couple of years longer than me, and even just in my short time, I was kind of working for about a year before we kind of kicked off. Just the contacts he'd kind of grown in that insurance space. I mean, the good thing about the way that we started the company, we bootstrapped the whole thing. So we basically we jumped from working for someone to basically doing consulting, professional services. And it wasn't for a few years until we actually kind of got the size and the scale to kind of credibly launch a managed service practice. So yeah, that's kind of how we did it.
What about buying behavior over there? Did you find that being a couple of Kiwis who again didn't have sort of deep roots into that particular community, was there a reluctance to take a punt with you guys? Was there a perception that I don't know, they're not quite big enough? When everyone's operating at the scale you mentioned before, was that a difficult sell? And if so, how did you get around it?
So I think that, there's a very different thing selling a managed service proposition to professional services. Going in and being a consultant, it's all about buying you. It's about buying your technical capability and the cred that you can kind of put across. Selling managed services is all about organization and process and your referenceability. So when we started, we did professional services. And so, we're very good at that technical conversation. We've always we grew kind of through that technical side of things, that's how we did it. And of course, we kind of pulled a couple of customers along with us that were kind of from previous engagements and that, and just kind of grew it from there.
Okay. And so when was it that you made the leap from sort of focusing on those professional services, decided to maybe start investing in the infrastructure, the people, to start playing in that managed services space?
In terms of our foundation customer. So yeah, I mean, we it's a bit of a crazy story, but we ended up doing this huge data center migration for a big healthcare company, it was kind of it was probably a good 6 to 9 month type thing, and it had a very kind of the end date was set. The data center was shutting, and there was no extensions possible. And so over the course of this project, we grew really good sort of relationship with the kind of key stakeholders, and kind of over the course of a couple of months, they kind of trusted us so much that they sort of we came to the sort of position where they said, well, you've done such a great job of helping us navigate this pretty complex and pretty time sensitive situation. How do we continue an ongoing relationship with you? And so, this is one of those crazy deals. And so they were really our first managed service customer. It's still a customer today. We ended up kind of converting them into a managed service customer, which was a great story.
When you think back to those times, like the startup stage, the lean, kind of flying in any direction as it kind of took you, what's the overriding emotion that kind of comes to mind or feeling as you think back to that time?
I mean, it's lots of fun. But I think, it's quite interesting with what we're doing in New Zealand, because, the problem in the UK, because we were bootstrapping the whole thing, at the time, and we were just, we do some crazy hours, and, we didn't have any kids or any family back then. And, it was kind of all on us, to go out and find work and deliver it and make sure that we could pay ourselves and pay our staff and all that sort of stuff. Whereas now in New Zealand, it's kind of different. There's still the excitement of it, but we've kind of got this parachute of this big company in the UK, which can fund stuff, which is a little bit different to first time around in the UK.
And you've got Roman.
And we've got Roman. Yeah. Makes it a lot easier.
So while all this was happening in the UK, Roman, were you keeping tabs on kind of how they were progressing, how they were tracking?
A little bit. We just caught up for a beer when Markus would come back to New Zealand, or if I'd be in the States or in the UK, we'd always catch up. So I suppose I wasn't keeping intimate tabs on what was going on, but just a passing interest, and the comments were made occasionally that if there ever was a desire to to come back to New Zealand and do the same thing here, then I'd be keen to have a look.
So what made, I guess, your working relationship at OneNet all those years ago with Markus and Greg, that special, that unique, that there was that underlying desire all that time to get back into it?
Because it was probably a similar stage for OneNet when we were, trawling eBay to find, cheap servers to run things and, all those sorts of things. I mean, that's the fun part of I think that's the fun part is when you're, winning deals that you're not supposed to and all that sort of stuff. That's the interesting times. And when you sort of got to muck in and get involved in all sorts of different areas because, there's no one else and that sort of thing. So, like Markus said, doing it in New Zealand now is that really, really nice mix where you're sort of, you're this unknown company in New Zealand, but you've got this, great organisation in the UK that's backing you. So it's almost the best of both worlds.
On that, there's a lot of questions coming to my head, but I'm going to go with this one first. So you're now going to be a company that's operating in the UK and NZ. I also saw on your site you've got a US number. What's the US play? Is it just that you've got branch offices of key clients in the UK located over there? They need some ability to get in touch, or more than that?
It's a long story. We went in elephant hunting for a while. That's another whole story. We're not even going to go there. But anyway, the long story of it is we've got a virtual presence in the US, and so it's actually come in really handy. It means we can support US companies from a Microsoft CSP perspective, and obviously from a support capability as well. We've got our 24/7 support capability now as well, although there's nobody actually in the US. But yeah, okay. That's the extent of our US operation.
That's cool. But so if we sort of focus on the UK and NZ, obviously very different locations. I know in my own day job with Lightwire, we've worked quite hard to try and come up with a geographically neutral brand, with like .com, having a website that doesn't specifically talk about, any particular place to the exclusion of others. A lot of Australasia, a lot of Trans-Tasman, that kind of wording. How are you guys going to work with the brand to kind of, factor in your sort of New Zealand centricity or your UK centricity without having either market feel excluded? Is it different sites for different countries? Is it the one site adjusted? You look like you've already got the domain sorted with, I think, .tech at the end of Virtuoso. So run me through that from a marketing perspective. How do you nail that inclusion piece?
Yeah, so from a web perspective, it's quite So I mean, our domain name used to be virtuoso-uk.com, which wasn't very not very forward thinking of us. Yeah. And so we ended up going through this kind of we bit of a migration alignment in terms of exactly getting to a point where that can be generic enough from a web perspective. We've also, over the last couple of years, spent quite a lot of time on SEO and search engine optimization. So obviously, that's pretty complicated in its own right, And so where we've ended up, we actually have two sites. Depending on where you're coming from, you end up at either one. And there's effectively a version of every page on our website for each geography, and that enables it to play nicely from an SEO perspective as well.
And I'm guessing you're also, because of the way that you've progressed, you're uniquely set for that whole 24/7 support piece, right? You've got people everywhere.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, that's one of the and whilst it's more difficult because of the time zone to run an organization across those two geographies, from a customer support and from a on the ground perspective, it's amazing because you've always got someone in a time zone where they're sitting at a desk, ready to answer a call and working in that time zone. And there's this whole thing around having a lot of people, when they do follow the sun, they kind of need 3 locations to kind of do it properly. But with New Zealand and the UK, because they're basically exactly opposite, we can get away with just 2.
Cool. So I guess we've sort of talked about the origin stories in the UK, and I guess how you structured that and how NZ is going to be different because you've got the depth of resources now and it's not run on a shoestring. Are there any other sort of key, whether they were things you did poorly and wish in retrospect you'd handle differently, or things you did bloody well that you think would be good to keep in mind as you go into NZ?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think with many businesses, in terms of that kind of growth that you see, when you start off things on a shoestring and you're kind of bootstrapping something, you kind of do whatever it's going to take to bring money in. We did all sorts of weird and wonderful consultancy stuff. Back to that US thing, we tried to sell this crazy product. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that you kind of go after. And then kind of, I guess, as you sort of mature as business people and as leaders, focus is the key. The more that you can just focus in on the one thing that you're really, really good at, and kind of try and bat away all of the other distractions, that's going to get you to your end game, or whatever, not your end game, but whatever you're trying to achieve a lot quicker. And I think that's definitely, what we're doing in New Zealand. We've in the UK, it's a really competitive market there. I reckon London is probably one of the most competitive places from an MSP perspective. And we've done it tough, and starting an MSP from scratch, building up a track record. Just to give you a view of the scale, like we still come up against in opportunities, we'll come up against MSPs that we've never heard of. 10 years in, it's just insane. And there's just the sheer number of businesses that are there, and it's a tech hub of Europe and the world. There are so many companies that have got their headquarters there, or at least they'll have a technology center of excellence in the UK. And so, it's just a place that a lot of stuff happens, and it's a great place to be involved.
I mean, I think it takes an organization, and Virtuoso is no different. It takes them a while to work out what they want to be and how they want to be it. And so, Virtuoso has now worked out that they want to be a managed service provider. And how do they want to be it? Well, they want to help organizations leverage the power of the Microsoft cloud, and that's their focus, right? And it was probably, there were a number of points in that journey where they could have been something completely differently, but now we've worked out what we want to be and how we want to execute on that. So that's a massive head start in terms of where we are in New Zealand.
Yeah, I think there's huge power in saying no to things, right? Like everything can sort of seem reasonably appealing if it's pitched in the right way, but ultimately, if you focus on everything, you achieve nothing. So it's been a lesson. I think we've been through it at Lightwire. You guys have. I think ultimately every startup has. You got to find your place. But I guess a question for you, Roman. You've gone. What was your first role at OneNet? Because I know you ended up as GM, but what did you start off as?
Just sales support.
Okay, so sales support through GM. In that journey, to get that clarity around strategy, around execution, what did you do professionally or personally in terms of upskilling to get your head around that strategy piece that you, I guess, now are going to take into your GM role with Virtuoso and NZ?
I think it's just a journey, and like Markus said, as a startup, because cash flow is king. Someone says we have a budget to do something, and you go, great, we'll help you along the way. And I just it's just the maturity of Virtuoso enables us to have that clarity, and the financial backing means that we don't need to go chasing things left, right, and centre. We've sort of got our value proposition, and we know what we do, and we're really, really good at it. And so we don't need to, diverge off track or whatever it is. If someone has an opportunity where there's, they've got a budget, and we potentially could do it. If we don't think it aligns with what we're really, really good at and where we want to get to, then we don't need to go and chase it. So I think, we've got that clarity of vision, which has come from, Virtuoso growing up over 10 years. I completely agree, right? Have a small to-do list, and a big not to-do list. And Virtuoso has arrived at that point. And I completely agree.
Cool. And so I get why New Zealand, why now? Why during a pandemic? Why in one of the most difficult times to find great staff in a very difficult labour market?
Yep. I mean, there's lots of good reasons for that. But one of the ironies is that Markus came back to avoid being in lockdown, where he'd been for 18 months. Yes, ironic indeed. But, I think, you mentioned the war on talent. Well, we've got a really, really good value proposition for talent. So, a big frustration of mine in a former role was that we'd hire these awesome graduates and sort of train them up and stuff, and they got to 26, 27. In fact, Markus was one of them, and they'd say, we're off overseas on our OE. And you go, okay, well, we've lost that person. You can't, you're not going to talk someone out of doing that. It's sort of a rite of passage. Whereas, if either in the UK or in New Zealand, we had a staff member that, said that, we'd go, great, go and work in the UK office or come and work in the New Zealand office. So in terms of a value proposition for talent, no overtime. So, you don't have to get up at 3 a.m. And do that upgrade because we've got someone that's wide awake in the UK or wide awake in New Zealand that can do it. Then there's the opening of the Microsoft data centers here in New Zealand. And we think that's going to be massive. And Markus can talk a little bit about their experience going through that when Microsoft put the data centers into the UK, I think in 2016. But for an organization that's core focus is helping organizations harness the power of Microsoft's cloud, having the data centers opening up at some time next year, we think the timing potentially couldn't be better.
Sounds like a reasonable pitch to me. Markus, let's talk about that. So what did you see and what do you expect to see in NZ with that coming up?
Yes, I think, so that sort of happened end of 2016, I think it was. And it was just like a real sort of aha moment for customers. There was definitely adoption of cloud before that. Our customers sit in the Microsoft ecosystem, right? They're very heavily invested in Microsoft technology. A lot of them are sort of information workers. They all use the Microsoft Office productivity tools. But up until that point, even though cloud regions existed in Europe and all the rest of it in the UK, I think there was still this perception that their data was offshore and that it was far away and that performance was not going to be very good. And as soon as those data centers landed, there was just an explosion of adoption. For many months and years before that, we would be going in and people would be talking about doing data center refreshes and all of the costs and complexity and that came with those types of projects, and really were people viably looking at cloud or public cloud as a realistic alternative. In the UK, I don't think they really were until onshore data centers came, and when that happened, that became the default choice. You'd be really having to convince people, and we weren't, of course, but you'd be convincing them the other way. You'd be convincing them there'd have to be a very, very, very good reason, either from a data sovereign, like a data security or some organizational reason why they'd actually be deploying infrastructure. And it's interesting. We look, we focus on the small business space, and again, that's different in the UK as well.
Yeah, I was going to say,
you think
different.
about even. Yeah, a mid-market in New Zealand is, I think, still small business in the UK. The conversations that we're having with customers, most of them have still got on-premise infrastructure. In the UK, that they just don't. In New Zealand, they'll look at 365 and they go, "Yep, we've got some email in 365. That's about it." In the UK, they don't have any server infrastructure. They might have some VMs left running in Azure. But they've pretty much moved most of their stuff to true SaaS, or they're in the process of it. And so I think there's definitely a maturity difference across the geographies. And I think that as soon as those data centers open their doors in New Zealand, it's going to be huge.
Yeah, even the connectivity piece, right? Like your express routes, your direct connects, those kind of things. The price, the flexibility and the ways that you can connect directly into those environments once they're on shore. Just
it's just a perception thing. It's not even you can tell people it's a 30 millisecond round trip time or whatever. It's in Sydney, and they don't want it to be in Sydney. They want it to be in Auckland or they want it to be in New Zealand. And regardless of technically if it works and that's fine. It doesn't matter. It's you're not having a technical conversation. Their perception is they want it in New Zealand.
Yeah, that's fair. I think another thing I was keen to get my head around is just on that sort of UK versus NZ piece. What's connectivity like in the UK? For your average business, is it more like Australia where it's awful, or is it like New Zealand where it's pretty great?
It's pretty good. Even the consumer internet is amazing compared to New Zealand. There's a lot of I guess in Europe, there's kind of like London and Amsterdam are the kind of two like data center hubs as well. So there's really good connectivity in place.
Are people typically using fiber to the premise or 5G, or what's the typical res sort of play?
Fiber to the premise is pretty standard.
Okay.
Brendan, exploring business opportunities?
Ooh, no, Australia and New Zealand are more than enough. Thank you. Have not got the mental bandwidth for that for any more. But okay, cool. So what is the labor market like for you guys if you compare the two countries? Are you seeing the same thing that we've seen in NZ with, just skilled labor shortage with the borders shut? Is that the same experience in the UK, or is it more open and free flowing there?
So I think labor's difficult anywhere, to be honest. Getting good people is the key to these businesses. And so, it takes a lot more than just, putting a job out and kind of hoping for the best. You've got to have the right vision. You've got to have the right strategy. You've got to be able to articulate it, and people have got to be able to be bought into it. And then you want people to be with you for the long term. So you need to make sure that you continue to do that stuff and keep people engaged and make sure that they've got progression and all of that stuff. Really interesting, because of course now, we've got staff in New Zealand, we've got staff in the UK. New Zealand's an incredibly difficult place to find and hire good talent. I mean, we have a really good story, and we have found some great staff actually, but it's been hard. A lot harder in New Zealand than in the UK, and staff in New Zealand are more expensive because they're more in demand. So, we do a lot in the UK, and this has always been not an issue, but it's been something that we've got to continually work at. We've got a really solid apprenticeship program, that we're going to try and replicate in New Zealand. Because if we can grow people, from the beginning of their careers, and hold on to them, that's just a fantastic thing to do, both for us and for the community as well. So, there's a whole bunch of initiatives that we want to do, but I guess, at a high level, it's tough, and it's really tough in New Zealand.
I think, though, one of the cool things about working with Markus and Greg, who obviously have spent the last 10 years in the UK, is that they've definitely learned some lessons around managing a remote team. They were in lockdown for, literally 18 months. And so when it came to hire people here in New Zealand, when we had applicants from, Hamilton and Palmerston North and those sorts of things, Markus and Greg were totally happy to have a look at them. Whereas, I probably would have been like, if they're not in Auckland, I'm not so sure. And as it happens, we've, two of our first engineers that we hired aren't based in Auckland. And, we obviously haven't had a face-to-face meeting yet. And so certainly there's some things that I've learned from the sort of the learnings that Markus and Greg have had from managing a remote team over the past 18 months in the UK.
Yeah, look, I mean, our office shut, and like everyone back in, when was it, March 2020. It's open now, but we're only just starting to get people to come back. They've had such a long time where that just became the norm, and I think that's quite different to New Zealand. Because the original lockdowns in New Zealand were only 5 or 6 weeks or something like that, maybe a little bit longer. That's not really long enough for that behaviour to change. But in the UK, literally, people have literally this has become the normal. And trying to then get people back into the office and try and figure out how this kind of hybrid working thing is going to work. We're not. I mean, you watch the news here and you think everything's gone back to normal in the UK, but the reality is it's not. We're still very much in the midst of working that stuff out. But certainly that experience, as Roman says, has given us a really good sort of perspective in terms of what that future world will look like and how remote working will play a role in our story. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting time, and we're definitely not there yet.
What's the vibe over there in the UK? Are you finding the team are pretty pumped about getting back into the office, or are they've really adjusted to a new way of working and they're keen to continue with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is positivity, but I think there's hesitance as well. Not just about office working, about getting back into going to stadiums and going to pubs and stuff like that. They really ripped the Band-Aid off in terms of, the UK is a really special case. But I think, who knows what's going to happen? Winter's coming, and potentially there's lockdowns on the horizon again. So we'll just have to wait and see. And it's it's a very tricky situation to navigate.
I remember going back a lot of years to a different role now, but one of the best hires I ever made was a guy called Ruckman, and shout out to Ruckman. That guy's great. Still work with him now. He's over with us at Lightwire, but actually he moved from New Zealand to Australia recently as well. So he's only up the road, 100 Ks or so. But he was actually based in Oman, I think at the time, with his family, having worked there for a while from Indonesia. And I actually, back in the day, I was using Skype, I think, and I interviewed him via Skype, and then had one of our team run him through some sort of remote technical tasks, and he absolutely nailed those. And he moved to New Zealand sight unseen for about 6 months before his family moved over with him, and has just been the most incredible hire ever. So I think at the time that was a massive outlier, but from what you guys are describing now, I think it's fair to say it's very much sort of standardized, par for the course almost, just because what we've all got used to.
Yeah. I mean, most of, in fact, I don't think, I'm not 100% sure, maybe recently, but up until, very recently, since March 2020, all of our hires were remote in the UK. So that's just the way that it is.
Yeah.
We're quite comfortable with it.
It's crazy. Yeah. Things have changed so much.
Well, yeah, I mean, they have, right? Speaking of past hires or leavers, I think Matthew Chair, who I think works for Lightwire now, right?
Yep.
So he used to live in Auckland, and his family's from around the Waikato, and he used to work for us at OneNet, and he said, look, want to move down to Hamilton. And we're like, well, you really have to be up here at least 3 days a week for that to work. And I remember him being on his motorbike and coming up to Auckland and all that. I mean, now, that you just go, you're a great employee and we're happy to have you working remotely. But, I don't know, that must have been 10 years ago or something like that.
Very different thinking back then. So, yeah, because he went to Datacom, I think, wasn't he? After you?
Yeah. Datacom, and then Department of Health or something like that, and then to you guys or something like that.
Yeah,
anyway,
he's awesome. Yeah, he's in Hamilton, but again, working from home a lot, and when he's not, he's in the office. But yeah, great dude. Shout out to Matt as well. But
yeah, absolutely.
Apparently, I like saying shout out. It's a thing I've done twice now. Anyway, the other thing I was going to say is. In NZ, you mentioned before that in the UK you keep coming up against entities who you've never heard of before, but you've been there for 10 years. But in NZ, I'd suggest, especially you, Rowan, you'd know them all. You've been in that market for forever. What is it? And this might be putting you on the spot, but what problem are you uniquely better positioned to solve than these other players that you know of in the market? What is it that you go into the market for those 20 to 300 seat organizations that you can go? We've got this, and here's why we've got it.
Oh, gee, I don't know. We better come up with something. No, that's not true. So I think what's happened is it's similar to accountancy firms and those sorts of things. So back in the day, you went to an accountant and they they balanced the numbers and all that sort of thing, and they had the two columns and they worked out everything and all those sorts of things. Now all of that is automated with technology. And so an accountant has become more like a business advisor, from a finance point of view. And certainly, if you think about a managed service provider, well, the nuts and bolts of installing an Exchange server or a SQL server, all those things, well, they're sort of gone, right? Everyone's sort of using the same tools. Everything's on Office 365 and that sort of thing. So I think really, it's about helping an organization harness technology to improve their business, and whether that's around helping them, choose a particular application, or whether it's around helping them, harness the power of data to gain insights or make better decisions, or whatever that might be. That's certainly what we think is the value proposition that we offer. So rather than focusing on the technology, sure, we use Microsoft. We could just as easily use AWS. We don't. We use Microsoft. But we think that's less important than sort of what you do with it. So, I think in New Zealand, there's still lots of MSPs that focus on the technology side of things. We've chosen this antivirus because it's the absolute best, and, that's fine. But how are you actually going to help an organization leverage all these amazing tools that are available now? You think about BI. Well, in the past you needed, a team of people and all that sort of thing, and, a specialized software person to do the reports and all that sort of thing. You look at something like Power BI, that's just democratized business intelligence. And there's all these amazing tools. Even if you think about Office 365, there's all these amazing tools within Office 365. Most organizations probably, harness the power of, 20% of them or 30% of them. We think it's about tapping that potential that resides and often resides in the tools that organizations are already paying for. So, less about the technology and more about using the technology to enable businesses.
And maximizing an investment by the sounds of it that they've already made without understanding how much more they can get from it.
Exactly right.
Yeah. I think also sometimes people, I think it's easy to overthink that whole special source, unique capability piece. I think sometimes it's as simple as doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. Accurate and fast information, just being decent people and being as good as you would. I think, honestly, that's, in my experience, in industries like yours, like mine, where that engagement piece can be the difference. That honestly can be all it takes, because often the technology, as you said, is the technology, but it's the service wrapped around it that can really make the difference. As cheesy as it sounds, I know it sounds
totally.
like a cliche.
No, it's totally right. And I think about the number of customers that we have won, where the number one reason why they're talking to us isn't anything to do with the technology. It's just that they've had a bad customer support experience. And I think that's honestly is one of the hardest parts of what we've done is genuinely building a business and a culture of people that care, that care about the outcomes for the end customer and about those interactions, and with every single interaction, making sure that's an opportunity to, really delight them, and particularly in the UK, we've found, what makes you different? You can't say amazing service but actually it's a huge differentiator, and it just takes one bad ticket, and you can lose a customer.
So two questions on that then. One, how do you quantify how you're tracking on that key metric, which is essentially what it is, that customer experience or customer satisfaction piece? And two, how do you make sure that your team gives a shit, and how do you know that they do? Those are my two questions.
Yeah, so on the first one, we've got, as you can imagine, as an MSP, we've got all the tools under the sun. And a big part of that is measuring customer satisfaction. So of course we do all of the
Net Promoter Score,
ticket-based CSAT stuff, and that happens on every single interaction. We also have Net Promoter Score. So every quarter we do an NPS survey across our entire customer base.
How you tracking?
And that's they're kind of not too bad. I think we're high 50s.
That's good.
Last quarter, which is actually pretty hard. The thing is, and lots of companies fluff it, the key thing to these are actually your response rates. If you've only got, if you don't have a high enough sample size, you can make any data look kind of right. So we're kind of high 50s on NPS, and on CSAT, we're pretty good. I think from an industry perspective, we're often in the 90s or very high 80s, which is pretty good. And again, the bigger the sample size, the harder it becomes.
I read something the other day that I wish I could, footnote and give credit to, but I'm not sure I'll ever find it again. But it was saying that, when trying to set KPIs, you don't want to be setting metrics that lead to unintended consequences. But if you set a key performance indicator being, or a key focus being the relationship that you establish with your customers. If each person is focused relentlessly on having a strong relationship with their end user or the person they're interacting with, then they're going to care about the experience, which means that the customer, sees value, that you can derive a pricing premium based on the value you're providing. It all comes from caring about that relationship with the person you're interacting with, or wanting a relationship with them. Does that apply, do you think, to the MSP space? Is that something you guys would see working as a focus, or is that something you already do?
So we don't set any specific metrics. Yeah, it's a question that's got me thinking.
It's difficult to measure as well, right? Yeah, it's difficult to measure. I mean, one thing that's I think one thing that goes a long way to sort of helping with the engagement that you have with customers is just picking up the phone. Right? There's so much communication these days that happens via email and chat and all those sorts of things. You'd be amazing that the picking up the phone, what a transformational impact that can have on your relationships with customers, because
so many people don't want to do it. So many people just do not want to pick up the phone.
Exactly right. Yep, exactly right. And I think you just get a whole bit of nuance from your customers in terms of, as opposed to someone hitting a negative satisfaction or positive satisfaction or whatever it is, you can drive into detail so much more. And so certainly that's one thing that we definitely encourage is people picking up the phone to actually talk to our customers.
Yeah, I love it. And I think, but for me, again, if you're taking the time to do that, then you do care about the relationship. And if you care about the relationship, for me, that drives customer experience. Customer experience determines everything in terms of how the brand's perceived. With Lightwire, every service is a managed service. 24/7 monitoring, alerting, and support come as standard, and our customer portal gives the kind of real-time, data-driven insights MSPs need in order to create great end-user experiences. In short, we're built to make you look good. So check us out at lightwirebusiness.com. So I guess you've gone from 9 in the space of 10 years, I guess. Yeah, 10 years. I saw you celebrate your 10th birthday recently, on your website. Congrats.
Yeah.
The scale's gone from 2 founders to 60 staff, 2 countries. Let's say, I won't make you look ahead 10 years, but let's say 5 years. What's the goal? What's what does the inspiration board tell you that you're aiming towards?
We do actually have a 10-year.
Oh, sorry.
We actually have a 10-year thing.
Hold you back. Go for it. What's 10 years going to look like?
Which is quite fun. I mean, one of the things. So we're a traction company. I don't know if you've heard of the entrepreneurial operating system.
I haven't. Please enlighten me.
But that's definitely look it up on the internet. Basically, there's it's a framework for running a business, and it was probably one of the first. That was a huge step in maturity for us. In terms of us going, and we actually got a professional implementer and a bunch of these key things, in terms of vision and values and all that sort of stuff has come from Traction. So a lot of these questions you go, yeah, thanks Traction, got that sorted.
That's awesome. I was actually going to ask, I should have asked the question. I was going to ask if there was a particular business model or framework that you work to. And obviously the answer is yes. And it's this one. We use very much the scaling up model ourselves, but I imagine there's probably a little bit of crossover in various parts.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, there's nothing unique in it. Basically, this guy, Gino Wickman, he wrote this book. He's written a couple of books, but the main one is called Traction. And we actually, all of our new customers, we send them a copy of the book as part of their onboarding. I mean, it's just, I guess the way to think about it is, for us, there's so many things in business where, before we kind of implemented Traction, you're just going, we're talking about the how we run a meeting, the how we communicate. And with Traction, you just go, well, that's just just follow that and actually think about the actual business and the strategic stuff that we should be thinking of.
Yeah, a classic one is, you think about how unproductive internal meetings are because no one really knows how it's going to go. No one really knows what they should have when they're there. No one really knows how it's going to end and all that sort of thing. Whereas with Traction, you know exactly how the meeting's going to go. You know what's expected of you. You know the questions that are going to get asked of you. It's all laid out. So it's none of this sort of, figuring it out as you're in the meeting, what do we do next? That's all laid out. So you can just get on with solving the issue or, working on the new solution or whatever it is without worrying about how the meeting's going to be run and, what questions are they going to ask of me.
That's awesome. And I love that you send that book to new clients, which is basically going, hey, here's how we operate. Here's the things that we value. This is almost a get to know us and how we operate kind of guidebook. So how long have you been doing that for? And what else do you send along with that, if anything?
Donuts.
How long have we been
sending out that book for?
Yeah, but don't tell anybody in case any of our customers. It's supposed to be a surprise. We say Traction, I think, is probably 2017 kind of ish. We did it, and then we're just coming up to our 3-year cycle. And we've been doing that for a couple of years, and it's great. And we put our implementer's card in the top as well, so it's a bit of a referral for him as well. Nice. So yeah, and we send donuts to our customers as well as a surprise on their first day.
Nice.
So traction and donuts, two truly transformational things.
One for the better, one maybe not so much. But yes, it's all about moderation. It's fine. All right, cool. So I guess, is there anything else, I guess, from your journey in the UK or NZ to date that you'd like to share? Anything that you think, I guess, anybody else who's maybe going through a similar journey in Australia or New Zealand would take, some guidance from or could learn from? Or anybody, I guess, in any business, really. I mean, I think that's the thing with some of these startup stories. They're not industry specific a lot of the time.
I think just start up.
Just get going.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, just do it. I mean, I think it's such a great space to be in. Things change, and there's just opportunities that just crop up everywhere. And I think, it's interesting. I think you were saying earlier, you've gone from this huge market to this much smaller market in New Zealand. Even in New Zealand, we see so much opportunity for good providers to help customers with technology, because the digital is the lifeblood of business these days. And if we can help customers get that right, that's going to make New Zealand businesses more competitive. That's going to make New Zealand more competitive as a nation. And so, there's plenty of space for people to come in and do this work. It's an exciting future.
Definitely. I got one last question to end on, Roman, and it's for you. You obviously had a hell of a stint at OneNet. You did great things there. You ended up running the ship from an operational perspective as GM. You get the call, or you sort of had your next in a series of conversations with Markus about this New Zealand gig. Did the timing make you think long and hard about it, or was it always, we can make this work, doesn't really matter, with pandemic or no pandemic, I'm in?
We can make it work.
Cool. Nice. Love your certainty. I'm not sure I'd be in the same boat. Maybe I'm more of a glass half empty guy. Who knows? But that's great.
Ask me in a year's time. But no, it's having worked, it's different. I think if it's a mate of yours who says, let's go into business, we get along well and blah, blah, blah. I think it's different if you worked with the person before. And, having worked with both Greg and Markus before, absolutely no hesitation.
Nice. Oh, good on you. I hope it goes really well. I'm going to look forward to seeing what you guys do in NZ and the UK. Thanks heaps for coming on. It's been a really interesting chat. I feel like I got my head around what you guys are doing and where you go. I think the only thing I didn't hold you to account on there, Markus, is that 10-year plan. Where does it get you to?
16,000 happy managed users.
16,000.
So we're about 3.5 at the moment.
Cool.
So
how about we check in again with each other in a year or so, and we see how you're tracking. At that point, my math sucks, but I imagine you should be at least 4.5 roughly.
Sounds good.
Good on you. All right. Thanks again, guys. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Brendan.
Cheers, guys. And that's it for this episode of Insights as a Service. Thanks for joining us. As always, if you've got any ideas or suggestions or just want to get in touch, Brendan at insightsasaservice.fm, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn. We'll see you again for our next episode, which will be the last of the year, when Nick Phillips joins me to go through news and opinions.